This is Steve.
And this is Shawn.
Welcome to Acro Media's High Five.
So, Steve, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to be talking about Drupal 8.5 and whether or not you should install it right away, or if you should wait, or you should be an early adopter, or if you should stay on 8.4.
No, you should definitely install it right
okay.
away. That's not one of the questions we're going to talk about.
Oh, okay.
That's
fair.
You should install the new Drupal versions, the 8.4, the 8.5, the point releases they call them, because that's what the security updates will be for, and the old ones do. There's still 8.4 ones for a little bit, but those will drop off pretty quickly, and 8.3 and below is not covered.
And my intentional poking at you regarding whether or not you should not upgrade, the reason why I do that is because I've heard that before. You know, folks actually having websites that are not up to date, and they say, well, why should I? So before we actually talk about what's being released in 8.5, why don't you talk a little bit about why you should upgrade just as a rule of thumb?
I mean, the absolute biggest one is security fixes, because Drupal or any piece of software only really maintains fixes on the newest or the few newest versions, because it is just a ton of extra work to go back to old versions, and there's really no reason that you shouldn't update. So that's why they do that. So by not doing that, your site is literally more insecure. So that's the biggest, you really must update because of those reasons. But as it is, you get a lot of fixes and functionality. Lots of bug fixes come through in each new release, so you're just keeping those bugs for no real reason. And then with the Drupal point releases now, the 8.1, 8.2 and stuff, you actually get a lot of new features, which is kind of what we're going to talk about on this episode. So you're just avoiding having both fixes and new features. There's something like, I don't know, there's 80 different fixes that went into it or something. Wow. If you look at the changelog, it's very long, right? So it's each new release, you're getting a ton of stuff, right? It's not just one or two minor things that you'll never notice.
So when you were reading the patch notes and all of that, what was the number one thing that stood out to you that was like, oh, finally? 8.5.
There's a couple. There's probably about three. Probably the biggest one is a lot of the layout management stuff got in. So that is basically taking a whole bunch of the functionality that was in Panelizer and stuff like that, which lets you, put all your different sections and move them around and say, I want this to go here, and I want these nodes to show here, and this block to show here. A ton of that is in core now. And is nice and built with APIs so other people can work with it and stuff. You still need some contrib modules to manage some of the extras, although that stuff is also making its way into core for 8.6, 8.7. But a lot of that is in, and it's really, really cool, actually. And so that's a big new piece of functionality that you get, is this ability to do this built right within.
And I thought beforehand, though, you could still use the paragraph functionality in some way. Is it just that functionality is more robust now? Obviously, it's in core. Before it was...
Yeah, well, and this is more than just paragraphs. This is not just moving around a little bit of content on the page. This is full page layouts. Setting where you want menus and catalogs, listings to appear, and CTAs and blocks and stuff, and not just little bits within the thing. This is sort of a much more robust thing. And even paragraphs is a contrib module too. So this is a lot of that going in. To core, paired along with a bunch of media module stuff as well, which allows native integration of, image management, video management stuff, and display. Some of that is in, some of that is still coming, but things like you can natively play videos automatically through Drupal. Now you don't need a plugin or anything like that, right?
And when you say natively, is that still
you upload the file?
I know what it means. I mean, is it still worthwhile to do that instead of something like YouTube for SEO purposes and all that, and the fact that you have to keep the video on your server?
It depends on your use case. It's big if you have users uploading files or something like that, right? Or you want to control your videos more so than having them on YouTube, right? Yeah. Which we do have clients that want to do. They don't want to put them on YouTube, especially if they're subscription based or they're behind an account or something like that, because you can't do that with YouTube. Everything on YouTube's a public video essentially, right? You can make private ones, but they don't work with a subscription.
It gets all silly and all that.
So,
I
not for everyone, but for lots of people, that is actually a fairly important use case. Nice. And the fact that you had to do it with add-ons and configuration was more cumbersome than it sort of needed to be, and a thing people expected from a CMS. So it's pretty nice that got in.
Yeah, is it a fairly seamless player and all that? Have you used it yet?
Yeah, that's the point. I haven't used it a ton. I've sort of seen the demos and stuff, but it's That's the point. I mean, that's what kept it from being moved in for a while, is to make it nice and seamless. The only piece that isn't in yet that you still have to do from Contrib is there's not a nice sort of media library to browse media. Like, it's very much like files versus like, nice thumbnails and video previews and stuff.
Such.
But that does exist in Contrib, and it is going into Drupal core. It just hasn't made its way into there. Things have to be quite stable before they get
that's fair.
released in Drupal core.
So look forward to 8.6.
Mm-hmm.
Making
And
video
which
libraries
will be
even better.
out in about November, because it's basically every 6 months, pretty much on a fixed schedule. So.
What's the next thing you're stoked for?
Almost all the migration stuff got marked as stable now, which is
Migration
if you
from
need to do
what?
migration from Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 to Drupal 8.
Finally.
But it's also the API and everything. So for people building other migrations off of that, the API is marked as stable for people to build off of, which is important. And a bunch of the user interface stuff for Migrate got marked as stable and has had a ton of improvements on it too. Migrates used to have to be almost done completely from the command line, which makes them not very easy for people who are, site owners and stuff like that, and not developers and stuff. So now there's actually interfaces where you can upload files and connect to different things and stuff. There's still more work to do there, but from nothing to an interface.
So the
is
Drupal
a big
migration
deal.
team is finally giving high fives to each other and things like that. They've done
Yeah, because it was like a long, it took till 8.5, right, to get it, and they busted their ass pretty good in the last few months to get in there, because they just sort of got in under the wire.
Well, that also happened. That also helps the Acro initiative too, in which we've been putting work into migrating from past commerce modules. So now we have kind of the whole suite. Right
Yeah,
now.
and a lot of because we do a bunch of Contrib for Commerce Migrate, a lot of the people who work on that were doing a ton of work on Core as well, because it was basically two parts of the same thing, right? If all the base stuff isn't finished, you can only build on it so much, right? So it's a big milestone for us as well, because that stuff is stable, encourages people to migrate in general, which is people with commerce as well, and then helps our work on commerce and any of the other Contrib stuff, because what you're building off of is now much more stable. So there's still going to be small improvements and stuff, but the bulk of it is finally done.
So what's the next thing you're stoked for? This will be the last one we touch on before we kind of just point people to the actual notes themselves.
The last one, the media one, was a little bit, which I kind of touched on already.
Yeah.
That was sort of my third one.
Well, now you have to just come up with another one.
And now I have to come up with another one on the fly. You're a bit of a jerk,
A
really.
little bit. That's okay. What is it going to be?
The last one, probably Bigpipe Caching, is not only included, but it is on automatically by default.
That's actually
So
pretty big.
it is just the standard. It just works out of the box. You don't even know that it's on or anything or whatever. It's just the standard way that we do caching now.
Well, it was about a couple of years ago now that we did our episode on Bigpipe specifically.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about the capabilities of it.
Yeah.
But we didn't really talk anything about the implementation of it. And so now you're saying you don't even have to worry about that.
At
That's
that
just
point, when
happening.
we talked about it, it was a Contrib module, and then it made its way into being an experimental module in Drupal core, and then it was a standard module, but it was disabled by default, and now it is even enabled by default, which is a pretty big step. That means anyone who sets up a Drupal site just runs that, unless they explicitly turn it off, which no one would really do. There's no reason to. So that's a pretty big step for Drupal caching to get that kind of performance, that dynamic loading. It makes our dynamic page stuff and all the stuff we talked about in the
a
video.
lot of dynamics.
Yeah, a lot. Well, that was a thing that was really slow in Drupal, right? So to fix it, that's good, and to have that automatically fixed for everyone, because people, when they see like setup caching, oftentimes it is complicated and it sounds complicated, and even though that module was basically plug and play, you turn it on and it just works, people didn't turn it on. And so now when it's on, it's actually a pretty big step. So.
Right on. Well, we'll put a link down to further reading for the release of Drupal 8.5, so you guys can check it out yourself to not only validate what we're saying, but see if there's anything else that intrigues you. And you want to give us the too long didn't read of what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, Drupal 8.5, you should really update for security reasons and to get sweet new layouts, sweet media stuff, more migrate support, and Bigpipe caching.
Right on. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below. Subscribe to our channel.
Also, check out our blog at acromedia.com, follow us on Facebook, and check me out on Twitter.
Thanks for watching.